Hello everybody, you're listening to the latest episode of Back to the Books. My name is Percy Parchment. I'm a college student at Michigan State University studying for my bachelor's in history. To get ahead, I created this podcast to invite college professors from all over the state of Michigan to sit down and talk to me about their favorite history subject and teach me a few facts along the way.
Hello everyone, my name is Quinn Quill and I teach economics at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. I teach a lot about macroeconomics in America.
It's great to have you on. To my right is another professor from a different school. Mr. Scroll, if you please give us a brief introduction about yourself, please.
Sure, no problem. My name is Sam Scroll. I'm a history professor at Saginaw Valley State University. I study how the economy impacts history.
Okay, so for today's episode, if you couldn't tell by the title, we're going to be talking about the Great Depression. So, I've been learning about it in class, but I have a couple questions I wanted to ask you guys. And this is why I invited both of you, so I can get different perspectives on my question. My question is this: what made the Great Depression so damaging? Professor Quinn, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, sure. So if you look back to the late 1920s, just before the Great Depression, there was a lot going on. One of the biggest financial innovations at the time was credit. People fell in love with the idea of buy now, pay later. People started using installment plans to buy appliances, cars, and other products. But buying products on credit wasn't the problem, it was buying stock on credit, also known as margin buying. And this wasn't just the regular Americans putting money into the stock market. Banks were investing pretty heavily as well. That meant that everyone, including the banks, lost huge amounts of wealth almost instantly when everyone pulled their shares out of the market in 1929. And because the banks didn't have enough money, they couldn't withstand the bank runs that followed the crash, where thousands of people were running to the banks trying to grab their life savings before it was all gone. The result was thousands of banks eventually shutting down.
Alright, perfect. Now that Mr. Quill has given us a pretty good idea of what happened inside America's economy, let's pivot over to Mr. Scroll so we can hear his thoughts. Mr. Scroll, what do you have to say about the Great Depression?
So when we look back at the Great Depression, one of the biggest global consequences was countries implementing tariffs across the world. America started this trend with the Smoot-Hawley Act, believing that raising taxes on imports would help businesses recover. In response, other countries started to apply tariffs to American goods. This made it hard to afford the goods people needed from other countries. Some big countries that come to mind are France, Canada, or Germany. As a result, American businesses couldn't get their products to other countries as easily and began to struggle more. So, in short, instead of protecting economies, tariffs made it more expensive to both import and export goods.
Okay, so now that you guys have both kind of shared what you teach in your lessons, is there anything else you guys think me or any of our listeners should know about the Great Depression, especially for anyone with tests or essays coming up?
Definitely, Professor Scroll made a great point just now. Tariffs were definitely damaging to international trade. But one thing that you and other history students at home should consider is that the economy was already crumbling by the time countries implemented tariffs. The stock market had crashed, hundreds of banks shut down, and billions of dollars of life savings were already lost. So even if the tariffs never happened and trade stayed open, it wouldn't have helped because Americans didn't have money to spend to begin with.
I hear what Professor Quill is saying, but I also think it's really important to broaden our viewpoint when looking at a situation as big as this. The Great Depression was very damaging for America, but it didn't stop there. Following 1929, the whole world fell into an economic crisis. America's tariffs started a domino effect of tariffs across the whole world. And that domino effect crushed countries that relied on international trade. Because there wasn't any trade, it was harder for countries to bounce back from these economic problems. And I'm not necessarily saying that the economic crisis in America wasn't a problem, because it very much was. But what I'm saying is that countries isolating themselves through tariffs is what made the Great Depression so damaging for everyone.
Right. Let's talk a little bit more about trade here for a minute. While it's true that tariffs made things more expensive, most of Americans' economy at the time was built on domestic business and products. Even if trade continued, American businesses still would have failed because Americans were their biggest customer base, and now they had no money to spend. I'd even go as far to say that the biggest problem wasn't tariffs, but the Federal Reserve's failure to get banks back on their feet.
You bring up a good point with the banking failures. One thing I think we need to look at is the opportunity international trade would have offered to American businesses. Not only that, but how damaging tariffs were, especially for certain businesses. Take farming, for example. Farmers were already struggling to make profits because of overproduction and falling prices after World War I. So they were counting on overseas profits to get by. Those chances got crushed when countries implemented their tariffs. And not only that, but tariffs also made it harder for American businesses to afford any raw materials they needed from other countries. So that made recovery take even longer than it would have been without tariffs.
That's true, but America had enough big financial problems that even opening up trade couldn't immediately fix them. The whole American economy was built on the new idea of credit, which was nowhere near as secure as it needed to be. Because of that, people had nothing they could do to combat higher unemployment or lower wages simply because there wasn't any money in the economy after the stock market crash. That, to me, is a big reason why the market crash caused the Great Depression as long as it did rather than the tariffs. America should have been more focused on repairing its country's problem before international trade.
Well, you see, I feel a little different about that. I think America should have put more effort into repairing international trade because when those tariffs did hit, essentially everyone was put in economic gridlock. And while, yes, the stock market crash was very bad, the tariffs that followed made it nearly impossible for anyone to escape the economic hardships at that time.
All right, and that is all the time we have for today. I want to thank all of you for tuning in to this latest episode of Back to the Books, and I want to give a big thank you to both Professor Scroll and Professor Quinn.
Yeah, no problem. It was great to be here.
Thank you for having me.
So, in summary, the Great Depression was a huge economic crisis that impacted not just America, but the entire world. The combination of the stock market crash and the implementation of tariffs internationally led to a recession that couldn't be undone all the way up until World War II. This was an interesting episode for me. We don't typically have more than one professor per episode, but I was glad we did it the way that we did. I really hope that you guys enjoyed this, and I hope any history majors out there found this helpful, especially if anyone out there has a test or essay coming up and they needed a little bit more information. If you guys are interested in where we got our information, I asked the professors to attach an annotated bib of some of their sources if you guys want to see what they referenced. All right, and with that, this episode of Back to the Books comes to a close. Have a great night, everyone.